And it looks like we're live. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this podcast. Haven't done a show in a while, but I've got a special guest here. He's no stranger to this platform. His name is Tristan Gabriel. He's been here many, many times. We've had many great discussions. He's done debates over here. He's actually started, I think it was I don't want to overextend myself, but I think this was the first debate, the first live debate that I can remember ever happening between an IO and a full preterist actually occurred on this channel. That was I think a couple of years ago, but he's no stranger to the platform, and he has his own channel as well as excellent channels called 21st Century Mind. Go ahead, check it out. And I want to welcome him to the program. Tristan, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be on, and it's also a privilege as well. Your channel, I've stated many times before, is the best channel on eschatology. So thank you for having me on again.
Well, thank you for coming on, and you had me on your show last week, so that's a rarity. But I thought that was a great show, and it just kind of got, we were talking about full preterism mainly, and I know that you were a full preterist for a few years as well. And I guess what I wanted to do with this show, I know I told you I wanted to do a follow-up show, and my main objective was to this was kind of like a brainstorm. It just came out, just as almost a burst of inspiration. I said, let's do a show called Two Testimonies where we basically present, each our own specific side of the story as to why, one of us decided to leave Christianity and then the other one decided to stay. In light of the fact that we were both full preterists, we both left full preterism, why did one of us decide to leave Christianity and then the other one of us stayed? Is like one of us a um a traitor? Is another one a cop out? I mean, what is, how does the public view these things? We know that, we could both get nailed pretty badly on these issues. So I wanted to invite you over here and just get a little bit of personal testimony going, and then we can get into some theological details after that. And of course, if there's any questions, and I don't want to spend the whole thing, I don't want to spend the whole podcast on questions. So yeah, if there's like some serious questions that come in that we have time for, we could do those. But again, we may only have about a half hour to do those if they come in. But I want to stop talking right now, and I just want to open up the floor to you, Tristan. I know that and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is from what I've learned about you, about yourself, is you were someone who was raised in a Christian household. You became a minister, I guess, at a relatively young age. You ended up getting into the ministry and becoming a successful minister. And then you got involved, I think, in the doctrines of full preterism. And later on, you kind of segued into IO. And then I guess you came up against a brick wall. Let me go ahead and stop talking. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I'll let you fill in the details and kind of give your own testimony as to what happened.
Oh, thank you, Brian. I mean, you pretty much gave a good brief synopsis. I was born and raised in a Pentecostal apostolic home. My grandfather was a pastor. My father was on a pastoral staff in a mega church in California. Make a long story short, that was the church I was born and raised in. I eventually became a Bible college student in that church, a full-time minister in that church. I also toured and preached in preaching tours for our Bible college for about 4 years, all throughout the states, New York, Michigan, all of Southern California, Arizona. I worked for pastors in Portland, Oregon, in Pennsylvania. So I was really deeply involved in the United Pentecostal Church movement. I was a licensed minister, performed marriages. I was involved in prison ministry, juvenile ministry, everything from feeding the homeless. Christmas season would come around, volunteer my time for the Good Samaritan Center, handing out presents to those of low socioeconomic backgrounds. Thanksgiving would come around, the same thing, handing out free turkeys. I had a soul winner's mindset. I was 100% genuine in this, and I wanted to reach the lost. I truly believed that we were in the last days, the last generation. I was hoping that we would see this rapture that was to take place. I was a dispensationalist at the time. And to make a long story short, when full preterism was introduced to me, I had an Instagram channel called Theology Discussions, and it was a community channel. And somebody came and introduced full preterism to me. I had them on a live stream. And it sounded very bizarre, and it sounded very controversial. So I said, bring them on. I started asking questions, and there was certain arguments, namely the principle of audience relevance, the time statements that really did get to me. So I gave full preterism an open mind and open heart. And of course, we know that Don Preston was the leading voice of this. And I started binge watching all of his video clips. I watched every single morning musings on the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15, studying, taking notes, just like how we would in seminary. And I was pretty much convinced that full preterism was that answer to skeptics like Bertrand Russell, those who hold to failed prophecy, the skeptics. And so I was on board for full preterism for a while. But I was one of those full preterists who believed in a literal rapture or a literal taking away of the saints, kind of like Ed Stevens. I was one of those. I never did buy into the covenantal change, the spiritual resurrection. And so it wasn't until I started digging into that, I started, I was really keen into epistemology of religious experience. Brian, William James, you'd stated he was one of, if not one of your, if not the favorite philosopher. And William James was one of those, Alvin Plantinga, a few others, Andrew Newberg, those who studied religious experiences because of my Pentecostal background. That was something that was very intriguing to me. Also, neuroscience was another one. So when I started studying those fields of academia, I started seeing the weaknesses in the full preterist paradigm. Also, the arguments from the Israel only camp. I saw that there was an injustice, and I know that you saw it as well. The full preterists would say, hey, don't talk to the IOers because they're agnostics, they're atheists. But yet the full preterists get the exact same critique from Christianity. Don't talk to full preterists. Don't give them a shot because full preterism leads to agnosticism, leads to atheism, leads to universalism, something that David Hester brought out in his debate with Don Preston, that it leads to universalism, just like Max King and many other full preterist believers. So in a nutshell, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Yes, I started representing the IO preterists, debating against the full preterists. But at this time, I still hold to failed prophecy, meaning that there is a futuristic sense that yes, there is a reason why Christians are waiting for the second coming of Christ, for all of these prophetic state of affairs to manifest. Why? Because it didn't happen. But the full preterists state that it did, but that it happened in the unseen realm, and that all of these apocalyptic language is all just metaphoric language, but it was somehow fulfilled in the first century. So I do believe that full preterism is wrong. I don't believe none of these things actually took place. So I'm currently holding to Bertrand Russell's critique that this is a failed prophecy. And that essentially is what kind of led me out of the faith, where I can no longer wait for this any longer, that I do believe it is a prophecy like all other religious prophecies. And I just don't have the faith anymore to wait for it. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I think there's a lot of people that have the same they have the same experiences. I know that when I was I don't think I was ever a full-blown dispensationalist, but there was a time where I was leaning heavily towards that view. And I was on the I remember I used to be on all different types of forums. This is before Facebook, and I was on the Rapture Ready forum. And I remember there was a lady on there who um said that this is exactly what she said. She said she just gave her car away because she doesn't need it anymore because the rapture is going to happen in a couple of weeks. I don't mean to laugh at that and be disrespectful to another
Sure,
person's faith. I
sure.
understand, but this is the kind of mentality I think when someone gets wound up that tightly, um, in a sense of, expecting something any minute and then something doesn't happen. And then you find out, you start doing some historical research and find out, wow, this was supposed to happen in the first century. It's
Yeah,
kind of like, it's almost forcing you, creates enough momentum to force you into the opposite, extreme. And that's something that I think a lot of people, I would say that most of the full preterists that I've met have come from a dispensational background. And it was sort of like that, that momentum, it got that pendulum started to swing to the other extreme. You know,
yeah,
I just want to say, before I hand it back to you, that I respect the decisions that you've made. And I know there's a lot of people out there that I'll probably catch some heat for this, but there's a lot of people out there who say, well, you should be evangelizing him and you should be warning him and this and that. And but to be honest with you, I don't really think that God cares a great deal about what we believe. And I don't want to minimize the importance of faith. I understand the importance of faith, that
Sure.
all of our actions are backed by some sort of belief, and belief influences our actions. I don't want to create a dichotomy, but I really don't see how belief is really going to, you know I don't see how it's an end in itself. So for me, it's mostly about conduct and character, and that's one of the things in my religious journey where I kind of started out. Um, well, when I became an independent Baptist, so I was a fundamentalist at one point too, and
Mm.
I just want to say that and I'm not going to give a big long story or anything, but for me, it was my religious journey really started. I guess I could pin it back to when I was very young, and my uncle, he was actually in the Navy. He used to be stationed in Korea for like months at a time, and I used to go. We were all living in one house. It was my grandfather's house, and I got into his library and I pulled out a book. It was something like the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch. And so you've got visions of heaven, visions of hell. And I remember asking, I think it was my mother, what is this? And she says Hieronymus Bosch. And I was told, basically in a nutshell, good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell. And that's been pretty much my religion for the past 45 years now. I played it down somewhat when I was a Protestant. I gave lip service to well,
Mm.
what makes you good? Faith is what makes a person good. I gave lip service to that whole thing, but I was trying to play pretend, and I was trying to pretend that I believe that a person can be a good person just by mental assent to propositional truth, when in reality
Mm.
it's like there's a lot more to that. I mean, what would who's the better person? Is it the atheist who sees a man drowning and then jumps in and saves him, or is it the Christian who believes every element of the creed but keeps on walking and
Yeah.
would let the man drown? I would say no, no, no. I'd say that the atheist is the one going to heaven and the Christian is the one going to hell. And that's like completely, and I don't want to say I don't think hell's an eternal place. I have a different view on that. We won't talk about it this podcast, but um, that's totally 180 from Protestantism and Catholicism. So what
Yeah.
I'm saying is I'm not here to judge you, and I'm not here to say you're going to hell if you don't believe in this view. What I'm here to say is that we both have an experience and we're both headed in a certain direction. And I don't really think that God cares a great deal about what our intellectual content looks like, as long as we're headed in the right direction. So anyways, let me hand it back to you, and go ahead, and you could either answer, or you could get into another aspect of your history and flesh out your experiences and your journey some more.
Well, I hope, Brian, that if God is real and God exists and there is some sort of eternal punishment or consequences for my actions, I hope that God is not so concerned, like you said, with my intellectual beliefs, but I guess sort of weighs the heart. I guess you can say, if you're a good person, I still consider myself a good person. I'm still the pretty much the same person I was when I was a Christian. I'm not now that I'm not a Christian. I'm not out robbing people, murdering people. I still hold to much of the ethics that I was born and raised in. I would even say, out of all the commandments that you could have in Christianity, I'm high up there. I mean, I still follow this. Now, some could say, well, that's because Christianity is true, and things like that. But I like to look at it as in a humanitarian sense. Human beings existed long before Abraham. All around the world. So, where did they get their ethics and their morals? And of course, we can use the Romans card that they're a law amongst themselves. God gave us a conscience. Okay. But as far as my eternal state, Brian, that is something that I think about, almost on a daily basis. You know, um, where am I going to go when I die? And what am I going to do on my deathbed? Obviously, I've been on your channel. I've obviously denied the faith, and I know what the scriptures state. You stated that some people had said you should try to win me over. Well, it's going to be men of God like you, Brian, that are going to ever win me back over to the faith. Those who are willing to engage, have discussions. It's going to be men of God like you if I ever do, in fact, make that choice. But it's really not much of a choice. Brian, this is just how I feel. It's just this is where I'm at, and life is a journey. And yeah, I'm convinced that the scriptures don't apply to us anymore. Yes, you can glean some sort of ethics, you can glean some morals from a story, but because of the New Testament eschaton, that's where I say, you know what, Jesus was supposed to return in that first century, and if he didn't return, it's been 2,000 years too long, and it's pretty much it's the existence of evil that really does get me. It's hard for me to side with an intelligent designer, somebody with creationism, and yet we see suffering babies, we see suffering children, and that touches home to me, and it's difficult for me to side with that. So even if we take the religious text aside, we take the theology aside, it's pretty much the existence of evil that is really gripping me, and that's it. It has nothing to do with full preterism or eschatology. The existence of evil is something that I look at the creator, I look at the intelligent designer, I go, what in the world is this? Why this? And so there's something in me that wants to rebel against that, as far as not pledging allegiance, not being on that team. Because if I'm on that team and I pledge allegiance to that mind, then I'm part of that team that's causing the children to suffer. So if I could just hang my hat on one thing, it would be the existence of evil is what's keeping me from coming back. So that, in a nutshell, that would be my response.
Yeah, and that's very valid. I think, you've done some great you put out some great material on your channel, and also on this channel, and also on the various forums that you're on. And the problem of evil is a big one. That's one of the ones that really it bothers a lot of people, and I think that's one of the reasons why I left full preterism, because I said, well, wait a minute here. I got to a point where I was a universalist. I was not a covenant eschatologist, but I was pretty close. I guess somehow, I don't know how it happened, because I never read Max King, but somehow I ended up holding some views that were similar to his.
Mm,
And I ended up becoming a universalist. So, well, has been defeated, and the law has passed away. Sin is transgression of the law. So that means there's no more sin. And so all this stuff ended in AD 70. I said, well, that must
yeah.
mean there's no more condemnation. But then I said, but wait a minute, hold on a second here. Then what about people suffering? What about people, what about, child abuse? What about murder? What about all this stuff? Why does it have to continue? And I mean, this stuff is morally bad, right? It
Yeah.
can't just be subjective. It can't just be covenantal. There's got to be some sense in which God takes cognizance of what's
Yes.
happening in real time in the real world.
Yeah.
Leave our theological definitions aside. And so ultimately, that's what started me on the journey that we talked last week about um, questioning whether sin is forensic or experiential. But
Yeah.
for me, I mean, there's all kinds of views, out there. And for me, what settled because I started really thinking about this, and if I recall, what really settled, what addressed the issue for me about the problem of evil was, and I guess there's many, I mean, there's theological answers and stuff, but what did it for me was when I realized that, we have such a tendency to look at things according to, say, an Old Testament perspective, where if somebody does something wrong, God's going to send like thunder and lightning and brimstone.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's great. I said, I wish that, but do I really wish it? No. But I started thinking, and I said, that's the problem, is we're still looking at it from an Old Testament perspective. And we're saying, you know, that we're assuming that the sins are things that are just outward acts. And I said, well, wait a minute. I started reading the Sermon on the Mount, and I started really trying to assimilate New Testament doctrine. And I said, but you know what? If God, if God changed if God lifted humanity to a higher level, I mean, we can imagine that in the infancy of the race, yes, our parents took care of our problems for us. But then when the race reached adulthood, we're given a higher ethic, and we're expected to solve some of our own problems. And that just brought me right back to my upbringing, because I was not raised in a deeply religious household, but I was always raised like, hey, look, if you don't work, money's not gonna drop from the sky. And I was taught, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, and do what you need to do to survive, because, I was raised in a nice town. I mean, it was a middle class town, mostly white, but we were like one of the only families that lived in apartments. So we were kind of on the low end. We were on
Mm.
the other side of the railroad tracks. But my stepfather would always say, you got to you got to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and you got to go to work, and you've got to be a hard worker. And so I said, that mentality I took that with me wherever I went. And I'm like, well, what are we doing to solve all this evil? But going back to the issue of, the Old Testament, the New Covenant, I think if we read Jesus Christ's words, we'll see that he doesn't just define sin as something that's an outward action. He defines sin as something that's even extends to the inner thought and motive. And so I realized, and this is just how I solved the problem, and it doesn't mean that you have to accept it or that anybody that's watching this has to accept it. But how I solved the problem was, if God started intervening miraculously, and that's not to say that he doesn't he doesn't punish for sin. But if he started intervening miraculously, like every time someone committed murder, they would get hit by thunder and lightning. Every time someone committed child abuse, they would get killed by brimstone. Well, you would have to. I mean, he would have to not only kill everybody on Jeffrey Epstein's client list, but everybody that was thinking about being on his client list. He would be killing people by the hundreds, by the dozens, people that would even just be thinking about something. We would be going to the supermarket. We would be stepping over dead bodies. We would be going to the gym. We ourselves would probably be wiped out. I don't think that humanity could handle that kind of judgment. And so what I saw was there was a sense of mercy in which God was withholding his hand. At the same time, though, not just withholding his hand as if saying, like, I'm just sitting up here not doing anything about it, but saying, look, I've already given you the ethic. I've already given you the higher ethic that's going to carry humanity forward. Now it's up to you guys to get your acts together and start supporting justice, start supporting more culture in society, start promoting more morals in the public square, start promoting cleaning up the judicial system. Because look, I'm not against the death penalty. I'm actually for capital murder or capital sentencing. But I don't think that the justice system does need to be cleaned up. And so there's that double aspect of, well, we need to inflict justice, but we also need to clean up the justice system. Anyways, I don't want to go on forever, but that to me led me back around to that pick yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality, where I could say, okay, but what am I doing about it? I understand that, that people are guilty of all these offenses, and there's crimes against humanity being committed under our very noses. But what am I doing about it? When I go to vote, am I voting for somebody that's going to clean things up? Am I voting for someone? Am I supporting in the public square? Am I supporting solutions, or am I just making the situation worse? And lastly, am I doing anything by my example? Am I doing anything to straighten it out? So, that was how I saw it. And just lastly, one of the things that I often tell people is, if you really want to know how God inflicts justice, or not just how he inflicts justice, but how he punishes for sin, don't go to the Bible. Read Shakespeare. Read Shakespeare's tragedies, because this is what I like about Shakespeare. He took the stuff of life and he compressed it into a literary form that we can assimilate vicariously. And so something like, say, Hamlet's King Claudius, that's what we call poetic justice, where the king, his conscience is smitten, and then that begins his downfall. Well, that's true to life. That's something that we can imagine happening. Now, it's also true to life to say that sometimes the bad guy gets away. Sometimes the protagonist dies without being vindicated, like in the case
Yeah.
of King Lear, which would open the door to, say, a retributive justice in, say, the afterlife. For instance, if someone suffers here unjustly and they're never, there's no retribution in this life, well, Shakespeare may say the end, that ends the play, but
Yeah.
it lets us extrapolate and form our own moral judgment to where we could say, like Lactantius said in the fourth century, saying, because justice is unequal in this world, he stipulated that there must be a retribution in the next world, because, yeah, sin is punished in this world, don't get me wrong, but sometimes the righteous suffer unjustly, and sometimes the wicked escape without punishment. So that's something that solved it for me. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if the Hebrew God, if the Old Testament God hasn't changed, and he's still up there just watching things go on, and we would wonder why after 2,000 years, legitimate complaint.
Yeah. Sure.
We wonder why after 2,000 years he really hasn't done much to solve these world crises. Why did he let World War I and World War II happen? Why did he
Sure.
let millions get killed by dictators and so on? But go ahead and tell
No, no, I
us.
mean, no, it's these topics right here, like I said, has nothing to do with full preterism. But this is why Sam Frost left. One of the reasons why, because of the existence of evil happening in the new heavens and new earth, and it's going to perpetuate all throughout the human race. And there are different views on the new heavens and the new earth. I think you touch on a lot of topics, Brian. The topic of free will and choice. This Christ is sitting on the throne, or he's up in heaven somewhere, and he is promising humanity that he will one day return and stop evil. That is what the majority of Christians believe. So it would be like in heaven, there's no child molestation, there's no child suffering, there's no injustice that's happening in that world. Now, do we have free will in heaven? If we go to heaven, our sin nature is removed. All we do is just follow in line what our commander in chief tells us to do. So, in a sense, you may have free will. I mean, we don't know, but there are theologians who've talked about this. How does free will and free choice happen in heaven? If everything is good up in heaven, for the majority consensus of theology, Christian theology, there is no evil that exists in heaven. And so, to me, as an intelligent designer, God could have made a possible world here on earth, which he did. If you take the pre-fall in the Garden of Eden, there was no evil that existed. There was no physical death that happened. If you take the traditional view, rather than a mythological view of Adam and Eve. But God created a perfect world, a perfect paradise. And then once Adam ate the fruit, then that was the ripple effect that was cursing humanity. That's why there's Jeffrey Dahmers and Ted Bundys today. There's Adolf Hitler's, because Adam eating the piece of fruit introduced sin into the world. That is what the majority of, I could say even Protestant and Catholic Christianity believes. So to me, it's just that whole system, Brian. It's that whole system. Well, God could have any time made a world where there was no child suffering. If people were having evil thoughts, just like in the Tower of Babel, God intervened, changed their languages, changed their neurological properties. He made King Nebuchadnezzar believe that he was an animal for several years. So God can enter into the cognition of the brain, just like how we can do with artificial intelligence, a robot, and we can reprogram it. But God is allowing this program in our brain to have these various sinful, evil desires towards children. And I lean towards the children. I take an aim at the children because I think everybody can say that is objective, that children are innocent. So I'm not trying to appeal to emotion, which, by the way, when people say that, like, oh, you're just trying to appeal to emotion. Well, that emotion should tell you something. The reason why we're having that emotional response, we're thinking about suffering children, is because that emotion should tell us something about our survival. And it should question the system. And so I've pretty much, I'm not an atheist, Brian. I do believe there could be a mind out there. I think there needs to be, some further proof, whether it's Yahweh who's that intelligent designer. I think Alan Barnard does a really good job on debating this, but it is faith based on whether it's Allah, whether it's Yahweh, whatever type of deity. But there could be a mind out there. There could be some sort of minds, plural. I mean, who knows? So I am a skeptic. At the end of the day, I'm skeptical of it all. But really, when it comes to suffering children, the children don't have choice. They don't have free will when it comes to being violated, when it comes to being murdered. They're helpless, they're defenseless. And so, and this is why I even asked Dr. Frost this, and I think you saw the debate. And I asked a lot of Christians this. I say, look, if you had the power, if you were omnipotent, or if you had the natural ability, let's say you weren't a god, but if you had the natural ability to stop evil happening to children, sure, crime and evil can happen to an innocent adult person, even though that's very unfortunate. It's very evil, yes. But let's just choose children just for this specific topic. If we had the power to stop evil happening to children, which God does, which Christ does, all power has been given unto me, heaven and earth. He killed King Herod in Acts 12 for failing to give him glory, sent an angel, intervened, and stopped it, and punished right away. So I've asked, if you had the power to stop evil happening to children, would you do it instantly, or would you wait 2,000 years? And when I ask veteran pastors this, veteran Christians this, it's just so mind-boggling that they're like, gee, let me think about that. I think the correct answer for a Christian would be, in my understanding of morals and ethics, I would stop evil happening to children. I don't know why God is, postponing this. I don't know why He's not intervening, but I still am putting my faith in Him. Boom. I could accept that answer. But when somebody says, well, gee, I don't know, I have to think about this, and then refuses to answer, I think that that's very telling on what religion can do to the morals and the ethics of grown adults. So that question right there, like I said, the existence of evil, if I had the power, if I was in the seat of Christ or God, and I'm not trying to be blasphemous, but if I had that power, I would bring about the new heavens and new earth immediately. I wouldn't want. I've compared it to like a police officer. If there was a school shooter comes on and is killing everybody, you could say that's Satan, the devil roaming the earth, and yet the shooter's Satan. And yet here's the police officer, the embodiment of righteous and justice, and he doesn't do anything about it. We would deem that officer as cruel, as evil, negligent, and so I'm just pretty much using that same ethic, that same morals, and so that's where I'm at. It's pretty much the existence of evil. And like you stated, if God were to punish everybody and just zap everybody and just kill everybody who touches a child, hey, I wouldn't fight against that, even if it was by the millions. I think anybody who does harm to a child, I just think that there should be no forgiveness of that. And I do believe, and I know that I'm not taking this out of context, but Jesus did say that if any man harms any of these little ones, it'd be better for him to have a millstone tied around his neck and tossed into the sea. I know he wasn't talking about child molestation. I understand that. But there is a moral and a principle to those words of Jesus that I hold dear. And even as a minister, those words really stuck with me. The severity of harming a child, to have a millstone tied around your neck and tossed into the sea. So I've always said, well, do we baptize them, or do we drown them? Which one? What do we do? And it's that conflict in Scripture. It's the moral conflict that makes me a skeptic. That makes me say I can't side with anybody. That's why I'm a skeptic. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and I understand completely. That's probably, and that's, I think, why they call it the problem of evil, because
Yeah,
if men could have solved it that easily, there wouldn't be a problem. But there's a problem because and I don't want to say we, because I don't consider myself like, I don't work within the Protestant or Catholic grid anymore, so I'm kind of on the
nice.
outskirts. But
Yeah,
there is a sense in which you can certainly say that could be. I think it's just to say that could be an argument against theism, or at least against Christian theism, saying, well, if God could stop it, would He? Well, you'd think He would. If you'd think He would stop anything that would be harmful or distasteful to Him, but I don't know. That's one of those big issues and you did a great job in your debate. I think when you debated Sam Frost, that was really one of the most memorable, one of the more memorable debates I've seen, because I don't really watch too many debates I don't watch too many atheist debates. There was a time when I was watching more of them, during my hiatus years. I was watching some, and I was, I wasn't never thinking about being an atheist or an agnostic, but I did start to question some of these things, at least some of the narratives
yeah,
that I was hearing. For me, and I don't, I'm not going to, here to say something, say something terribly clever that's going to solve all these problems. That's not my purpose. For me, I think that the well, first of all, I think that child abuse is certainly a bad thing. Um, and I would just say that for me, murder would be a better example, only because child from a non-theistic standpoint, I'm saying strictly from a non-theistic standpoint, the sanctity of childhood is not what I would call a universal human ethic. In other words, there's other areas of the globe and there's other cultures which don't have a problem with some of those things. And, even in America, up to say the 19 till Franklin Roosevelt actually put an end to it. Child labor. Kids were working in the factories. They were working like 15-hour days in the factories. And
Yeah.
this was a Christian nation. There was Christians that actually endorsed that, Christian
Yeah.
capitalists. So I don't know if that's, at least in practice, I would say that's not, the sanctity of childhood is not, from a non-theistic standpoint, it's not a universal ethic. Now, from a theistic standpoint, from the standpoint of Jesus of Nazareth, absolutely, it's both in theory and in practice. It's
Sure.
a
Absolutely.
universal ethic, and we know
Yeah.
the world. I don't think some areas, so the rest of the world has caught up to it yet. But
Yeah.
I would say that murder, for me, murder would be maybe not the only answer, the only alternative, but it would be probably the better example, only because no matter which culture or wherever you go, uh, anywhere around the globe, whichever culture you study, murder, killing someone who's innocent, who didn't do anything to you, didn't bother anybody, didn't say boo, is always considered wrong. It's every single culture. So
Yeah.
for me, that would be one of the big ones. And not to say that obviously, the sanctity of childhood is a big one for everybody. But murder would fit the bill better, because I would have to ask, what is murder? What is God doing letting the murder rates increase all over the globe? And then of course, you have to drag statistics. One of the things that I found really difficult to locate when I was studying crime statistics, because I've been into true crime for years, over
Nice.
30 years. I grew up watching unsolved mysteries in the 90s. So I
Nice.
love true crime. And
Nice.
I remember doing some trying to get research, trying to get statistics of crime statistics from a large window of time, from say like 1930 to 2000. And those are very hard to come by. We can get the crime statistics, you can get them from like 1990 to 2020. They've got those 30-year windows, but anything larger than that, like anything like goes back to like the 60s or the 50s, when we know neighborhoods were safer. We know that because there's people who are alive who will tell you, yeah, I lived in the same neighborhood, and I was able to leave my doors unlocked back then. We know
Yeah.
that in many cases neighborhoods are not as safe, but it's very difficult finding those crime statistics. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering why God is letting the crime rates go up, why God is letting all of um, these atrocities seem to accumulate. They have an accumulating effect, and why He's not doing anything about it. Now, is that an argument against? Could that be an argument against theism? Absolutely.
Yeah.
That could. I'm willing to admit. I'm here sitting here as a Christian, talking to you face to face, being totally honest about it. Say that could be an argument against theism, in particularly against Christian theism. Does it have to be? No, but does it? Could it be? Absolutely. So that's something that like the big apologists should answer. I think that the big apologists, the people who like get paid for doing this, like
Yeah.
unlike myself, who
Same
work
here.
40, 50 hours a week,
Goodness
that's
gracious.
something that they really need to have better arguments to address those um those uh those criticisms,
Yeah.
because like you said, this is a big issue. And like you also said, it doesn't really seem like they're giving very coherent answers. I've heard many of the leaders of preterism and full preterism try to address the problem of evil. And I think Calvinism in Reformed theology is really kind of throwing sand in the wheels, because they're going to justify at the end of the day, no matter what anybody says, they've got to justify the belief that God somehow, he didn't have to be, it didn't have to be the first cause of evil, but he ordained evil, or he's the original. I guess he or everything that happens was ordained by him before the world was even created. So
Yeah.
we're talking about, now we're getting into Reformed theology, Reformed Presbyterianism specifically,
Mm.
and these guys have been the most vocal proponents of, I would say, fundamentalism since the 1980s. Much more so than the dispensationalists, only because only because they're not the ones that are actually in the trenches. They're actually they're actually in their towers. They're writing books and they're pumping out articles, and they're doing podcasts, and they're writing books and patting each other on the back, but they're not doing a lot of trench warfare. And so these questions are accumulating. They're not really getting answered.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that if it wasn't for, say, like hyper Calvinism, I think these things could be answered a lot better than they are now. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, when I was, a Christian, I would simply say that God created evil. That was just and then try to work my way around that. I found it better to say, I think it's Isaiah 47 verse 5. The Lord. I understand people say you're taking that out of context, but it shows that God was in control of Israel's world. That if He wanted to bring disparity, He could bring it. If He wanted to bring prosperity, He could bring it in His sovereignty. So that key word, as a Christian, is sovereignty. That God is allowing it to take place. Now, even if God created it, fine. You still have to side with God no matter what God does. Whether lean not into your own understanding is another one. So it's a faith based theology. Everything is tied around faith, and even Tertullian coined that phrase fideism, which is used in philosophy of faithism. That even if all of your reason and your logic as to why God doesn't exist, or why the Bible doesn't apply, or why you should be religious, something along those lines, you still have to take that leap of faith that you're still going to choose to believe in God anyways, regardless. Fear the Lord, even. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge and wisdom, according to Job. So the Bible has answers for this. And as a Christian, I've always found out that the answers were simply sovereignty. That yes, you have these valid arguments. Yes, you presented him. Paul never addressed the existence of evil. Jesus never really touched on it, as to why it exists and why God is in intelligent design, allowing evil to happen, especially for so long. Um, but I would say that the majority of the Bible answers that evangelicals use, apologists use, Christians use in general, is that God is sovereign, and that you still have to, put your faith in and live for this God, regardless if He appears to be wrong. Kind of like a Job situation, and that's usually what I get a response. So, but for me, I wouldn't do that for Allah. If it was Allah and I was talking about how passive or negligent Allah was, the Christian beside me wouldn't try to intervene and rebuke me and try to say, hey, don't talk about that God that way. When we know that Allah and Yahweh, they have the similar omni attributes, both, omnipresent, supposedly, omnibenevolent, omniscient, and so forth. So it's having to choose that, well, I'm going to stick with Yahweh, the God of the Bible, um, and reject all the other religions, even though they are also faith based and they also have similar, if not the same, omni attributes. So, and I remember when I was in Turkey, and I'll close it with this. I was in Turkey and I learned a lot when I was talking to these Muslims, and I was being real with them. I was talking about Allah, and I had to watch myself. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm in a Muslim country. I have to be careful. I'm not in America. I forgot. I was saying some very controversial, brazen things. And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to get persecuted here. But I can see in their facial expressions, I can see in their body language that a lot of times they haven't even read the Quran. A lot of times Christians, they'll go to church, they're born and raised in a Christian home, they haven't read the Bible from front to cover, but they'll believe in it. They'll even cry, they'll even give their reverence to it, but they haven't even read the Bible from front to cover. They're not really invested, let's say, like at a minister level, but they're still invested. It's the same thing with a lot of Muslims. When I was in Turkey for about 3 months, And I was just talking theology with them. And these were Muslims that were sincere, but they never read the Quran from front to cover. They're not, Muslim scholars, but just the whole thought of theism. Well, do you believe that Allah is omnipresent, omniscient? Then I would bring up the same arguments that I would bring against a Christian. And I would see their facial expressions, I would see their body language, and it's something that they never really thought of before. So, there is no answer for this scripturally. The only scriptural answers that we can glean is that God is sovereign, and that no matter what, you have to continue putting your faith in God if you're going to be in right standing with Him. And so that was my ideal for the longest time in my Christian life, Brian, was that, hey, I understand the existence of evil. I would never debate an atheist, because I know that they would use that card. And I really didn't have much to say other than, well, God allowed it. God is allowing Satan to roam the earth. Guys like Bill Maher, he made the movie called Religulous. He used those same arguments. The rest of the skeptics. So, I was just tired of using well, I'm still going to use the sovereignty card. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's true. I think that's a good crossroads to be at. This is probably one of the reasons. I don't know if it's the main reason, but this is probably one of the reasons why I've shifted more to ethics
Mm.
instead of religion. I've substituted ethics for religion because you know, and I don't get me wrong. I have friends who are atheists. I have people in my family. One of my cousins I grew up with. We were best friends during our whole childhood, and
Mm.
he ended up. I still don't know if he's 100% sincere about it. I don't know. He says he's an agnostic, but he used to like to. He was raised in a Catholic household as well, and they sent him to Catholic school. And he ended up kind of rebelling, going through a rebellious stage where he was starting, question religion. We had a lot of talks about religion growing up, but I don't have a problem with. It's like not like like I'm against, like I have an antipathy towards people who don't believe in a deity or don't believe in God. It's like I can have
Yeah.
conversations with them as well. I guess the main thing though over the years, and I don't know, maybe you could answer this, it's just the main thing that I found with non-theists is, and it's going to be one of those ethical things, is that like, look, if it's all about, the, conceptual knowledge, right? And it's all about changing people's intellectual content. Well, what's the problem if my Christianity is making me a better person, a better spouse, a better parent, a better employee, and a better citizen?
Yeah.
I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, it's like if believing in Santa Claus makes me a good boy the
Yeah.
whole year the whole year long, and I understand, yeah, well, say, Santa as a real person that can be falsified, but the truth claim that my belief in Santa makes me a good child to my parents, that can't be falsified.
Right.
That's something that can't be falsified. So what I'm saying is, if regardless of whether Santa's, real or not, it's like if there's no God, what difference does that little white lie make if it makes me a better person, a better spouse, a better employee,
I
a
get
better
it.
set,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
difference does it make? And the
Yeah.
only, I never really could get a clear answer to that question. It was like always like, well, because we need to, because it's good to believe the truth. But it's like nobody can prove anything. The theist can't prove beyond peradventure of doubt that there is a supreme being. But I personally don't think that the non-theist can prove that there isn't.
Right.
I don't know where it all began. I think at some level I tried to trace it back, as far as when did this whole thing of proof, this litmus test of proof, where did this come from? And I tried to trace it back, and the farthest I could trace it to was either some gullible theologian or some over sanguine theologian saying, look, I can prove this. Or possibly somebody challenging a theist and saying, "Hey, you can't prove the existence of God," and then the theist maybe taking the bait. But I can't, I don't think that any see from an intellectual, from a purely academic perspective, I think you could get away with saying that, we need to be able to prove something in order to believe it. But, I was raised on the street and I got most of my theology on the street. And I had to just say, after going through these difficult issues, I had to eventually say, but people don't do it that way. Most people believe something not because they think it's logical or because they think that they can prove it. Most people believe something because either they were taught it, or because they want it to be true, or because it agrees with experience. And I had to say, well, where did this proof, litmus come from? Because I don't think that we really need to be able to prove something in order to believe it. So my question was, why, if my belief in Christianity makes me a better person, then what's wrong with it? And I never could, in all the discussions I've had over the years with skeptics and atheists and non-theists, I never really could get a good answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain people who I wouldn't try at all to shake their faith or take away their faith, depending on their situation. I just wouldn't. And I have people in my life the same way, family members, friends. I just won't debate them. I won't get into it with them. They probably even still think I'm still Christian. But I don't. I'm selective on who I choose to discuss these matters because there's levels to this. If there was somebody who's on their deathbed and they're a Christian, I'm not going to go up to them and take away their hope and try to debate them on their deathbed while they're about to cross over to eternity. And hey, look, you made a good point. If religion is making you a better person in society, by all means. I mean, as long as that religion is not harming anybody. But that's the thing, is that religion has harmed. The abuse has harmed. That Santa Claus lie has harmed, and it's been used to oppress and abuse millions for generations. So I try to look at this, academically, scholastically, with taking myself out of it. I know you do as well. I think any student of academia and the Bible and theology in general should take themselves out of the picture and look at this solely in an objective sense, that it could somehow be applied universally to all humanity. So, I mean, no, I'm not out to destroy, Christianity or religious belief, for everybody. It's just, it just so happens that people who are on this level, I enjoy the dialogue. I enjoy fleshing out and teasing out what could be the truth. Why do we value the truth, Brian? I don't know. Why does our species, even if we suspect that the truth is going to hurt us, what is it about the truth that we value so much? Is that something conditional? That as children, we're supposed to value the truth. And then if the truth could potentially hurt us, like you want to know a verdict, you want to know a result of something, you want to know, but there's something about the truth that's just going to continue itching your way until you find out what the truth is. Why do we place value in that concept of truth? I don't know. And this is where we get the saying, ignorance is bliss, right? Like not knowing can be a blissful thing, and you can still be a happy person, and still be, religious or extremely superstitious. Living out in a jungle somewhere, believing in all these gods or whatever. You can still live a very fulfilled, happy life. So, is happiness the key to it? And this is where a lot of epistemologists, even some renowned ones, have turned to phenomenology. Brian, it's kind of like where it's, Herschel is one of them, and a few others. Phenomenology, they have stated, if you're tired of having that Western logic, analytical approach to life, then turn to phenomenology, where it's kind of like everything is based off of feelings and everything is all subject to the cognitive experience of things. But then it's like, how do you govern a nation, right? Like, how do you raise children? How do you look after the future generation if everything is just subjective and it's all, phenomenology, I guess you can say. So it's like, I get all this. What's the point? Could it be? I lean towards, I do with this. By feeling, just by intuition, I lean towards Wittgenstein's approach of morals and ethics, that it's all hinged in our language. That in order for us to know something or to suspect something good or evil, it's because of the phonetic sounds that we created that's been indoctrinated in the brains of children. This is why you go to other sentient beings, and you look at animals, they don't have that sense. Look at, the chimpanzees. They may have it to some degree, but not in a sophisticated way like we do. And that is because it's been hinged on language. It's been hinged on the sounds and the mental images that we created. And this is why Ludwig Wittgenstein was known as the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, kind of changed the whole game, a student of Bertrand Russell. So I tend to lean towards that. Like, okay, the reason why these religious people, let's say Muslims, have such, they could smell pork, or they could, put bacon in their mouth, and they're going to have a visceral reaction. They're going to throw up. They're going to say, oh, that's because they've been taught that by language. It's the same thing with any other religious faith or any other moral and ethic. That if it wasn't for language, how would we really distinguish what's right and what's wrong, and give consequences if you do something that's wrong? This is why in the animal kingdom, beings similar to us, primates, gorillas, chimpanzees, the whole entire animal kingdom, look at how they're living. And yet there's no justice system, there's no accountability. And yet, this is why we can say criminals in the world, if you're a human being, you're a criminal, you're acting like an animal. We say that you're acting like an animal. And it's because of our neurological properties and a language. So that is what I'm at right now. I think that's a safe bet, materialistically wise, that if it wasn't for language, we wouldn't really have much concepts of good and evil. We would just be, we would just live and experience and then die, and not really care about the future generation of the human race, because we wouldn't have the communication to really bring about that sophisticated thought.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this is why I really lean heavily towards pragmatism, because I think we talked about this last week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What is the cash value in experiential terms?
yeah,
If this idea is true, what change, what change, what difference does it make in someone's life? And I think that, questions like the problem of evil, yeah, well, those are important issues. But for me, looking at it from a purely pragmatic perspective, I'm not dismissing the problem of evil. I'm not trying to make it go away or say it's not there.
sure.
But my pragmatic response to the problem of evil, again, it agrees with my substitution of ethics for religion. It would be, okay, the evil exists, and all I know how to do is what I've been given to do. In other words, I know my marching orders are to do my best as an employee, as a citizen, to pull the lever every time it comes time to vote, to make sure that I do my best in the civic and in the community sense.
Yeah,
And that's pretty much to be the best person that I can possibly be, and to try to curb evil when I see it,
yeah.
but not to really, it sounds like a cop out response,
No, not at all.
because yeah, I mean, well, some people will say that, you're a cop out because you're not solving the problem. But it's like, why do I have to solve the problem of the
Exactly.
universe? I can solve the problem of my household.
There
I
you
may
go.
be able to, if somebody gives me a long enough leash, I can solve the problem of my community, or my city, or my state, but I can't solve God's problems. If assuming that God exists, which I believe, but I can't solve those problems, but I can solve my problems, and I can do what I've been told to do. In other words, I know what my marching orders are, and I've got to go by those. And so, these theologians that sit in their ivory towers, and some of them are very good. But I think a lot of times they get too caught up in the world of conceptual knowledge, and they
Mm,
forget, again, I got to bring William James back to the table. Again, they forget that that concepts are supposed to dovetail back in with the perceptual world. There's supposed to be an
mm,
exchange between concepts and percepts. And when
yeah,
something exists solely as a conceptual reality with no playback in real time, well,
yeah,
now you're dealing with something that's like full preterism. Anyways, getting back to full preterism, because I want to ask you a couple questions. I know we're almost
sure.
at the hour mark, but I know you've been doing a great job on tackling um, the main objections to full preterism, which include the problem of evil. Where do you go from here? Because it seems like your channel's really taking off, and it seems like you're trying to get a lot of material in, from different perspectives. You've got, you've had me on your channel. I saw you had Jeremy the other night. You had and Jacob. See you got somebody planned for next week. I see you've got, you had a DaCosta on you.
Yeah.
What is your, are you just trying to do what we've all been doing, is just trying to offer a cross section, or are
That's
you
it.
actually, okay, so you're not, you don't have an actual agenda to you know blow up any towers, or to
No, no, I just,
to
I like, like I said, I credit you for any success that I have on my
Mm,
podcast because, by the debates and everything I came on, that's what really inspired me. My channel is 21st Century Mind. So, if you're in the 21st century, you have a mind, you're more than welcome to come talk about anything. It doesn't have to necessarily be religion. If it's for anybody and everyone, even if it's politics or it's culture or whatever, it just so happens to be in the preterist circles. And that's who I'm gearing it towards as of right now, for the preterist community in the Facebook group. So, those who would like to have discussions and have debates, you can come on my channel, just like yours, Brian, and I would gladly host it. But yeah, as we like to debate, we like to have these discussions. It is a theology channel. Even though it's not a Christian, I still enjoy theology very, very much. It is my favorite topic. Bible theology is my area of expertise. So, I still eat, sleep, and breathe the Bible, philosophy, science, these type of topics. So, I'm just seeing where it goes. If there's somebody who would like to have a discussion with me or debate with me, come on my channel. If there is somebody who would like to host a debate, on these topics, that's where my channel is going. But yeah, it's pretty much very, very similar to yours. As far as the eschatology is concerned, anybody and everyone is welcome to come on, and by all means have your liberty. So that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, and that's great. I appreciate everything that you've done for just to keep the conversation going. Because, like I said last time, you've really thrown some significant hurdles in the way of full preterism, and I
Yeah,
think they're starting to listen because they're forced to listen. I mean, there's no way to get around some of these arguments, and especially when we get into failed prophecy. That's one of the things. One of the things I might be interested. I don't know. I don't know if it would be anytime soon, but one of the things I might be interested in debating, if you ever, want to set it up, or if you know someone who wants to set up, would be Second Peter. That would be an issue. I actually have contacted a couple of people, um, you know, uh, within the last few months, but nobody wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because my thesis is that Second Peter was written as a sort of a damage control.
mm,
So I take the view that it is a pseudepigraphic epistle, and that what the author is doing is he's actually reacting to the criticism. Well, hey, look, that generation has already passed away, and what happened to the promise of his coming? He was supposed to come before that generation passed away,
yeah,
and he's reacting to that. What he's doing is he's resetting their expectations. And now he's saying, instead of saying, oh, it's going to happen soon, it's going to happen soon, now he's saying, hey, a day with the Lord is as a
right,
1,000 years. And this is where we get the modern, or I should say the amillennial view comes in, where
yeah,
now we have, people saying, well, soon isn't our soon, it's God's soon. I think that's where a lot of those arguments came from. Anyways,
yeah,
that would be one of the areas that I might want to debate, like maybe this summer. Um,
nice,
Other than that, I really, like I said last time, I don't plan on doing any more debates. I don't have really any shows planned. The only things I might do are like just, if like conversations like this, because I like these, because again, you've got I think a lot to offer in the apologetic circuit. And since you were a full preterist, and you know a lot about the system, I think there's still some room for some debates even on this channel. If
nice.
you
Thank
have
you,
anybody that you want to debate on this channel, and
thank
we
you.
can set it up, I don't mind hosting it.
Don Preston, let's set it up right on your channel. I've already offered it to
Ooh, I don't
him.
think he's not gonna want to do it on this channel. I can guarantee you that.
Oh man.
No, he's gonna go for the big channels. And I
I
don't
don't know.
blame
He,
him. I
he
mean, if
might
I
he might
was,
want he might want to get me on the
yeah,
small channels. Yeah, I don't know. He might want to
Yeah.
keep me on low,
I'd
on
like
the
to.
low.
I'd like to see. I would really like to see an argument, or actually a formal debate between what's his name, Bart Ehrman, and one of the full predators. Bart Ehrman, and a lot of people put him down, but to be honest with you, I've actually learned quite a bit from Bart Ehrman, and
Yeah,
I don't agree. Like, look, I don't agree with all of his conclusions, but one of the things I like about him is he bends over backwards to be objective, and I don't see that coming from too many, Christian apologists.
yeah,
So I appreciate some of his stuff, and especially his work on James. I appreciate his input on James. He thinks that's a pseudepigraphic epistle too. And so that's going to be one of the things that I might talk about this summer. But anyways, I don't want to keep you too long. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention? Anything coming up? Anything happening out
yeah.
there in the world that I don't know about that I should know
Yeah,
about?
yeah. I mean, I have a debate with the full preterist, Holger Neubauer. He's going to be flying me out to his home church, I believe, in Michigan, and we're gonna have a 2 day debate, just like how we've seen other full preterists do. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's right around the corner. So that's pretty much what's happening with me in the debating world. I'm always seeking to see if there's full preterists that would like to have a live discussion, a respectful one, or even a debate. I prefer the debates because I really like to. There's just something about it. I really like to get in with these full preterists. But that's pretty much it. I'm looking to see what the future holds for the preterist community, for full preterism. Who's going to be the leading voice after Dawn? Is it William Bell? Is it Mike Sullivan? I'm a fan of theology. I'm a fan of debates. They need to happen more and more. And I'm just hoping to see, just exciting conversations. I look at it just like a sporting event. Even you yourself, Brian. You're a veteran debater. I've seen your debates before on Standing for Truth. Phenomenal. And I'm hoping that you yourself you get to have more bigger names. That you get to debate with or even have discussions with. So to me. I'm in it for the love of it. I love Bible theology. I love philosophy. I love science. I love discussing these things. And it's not so much whether I'm right or I'm wrong. I'm just simply trying to flesh out what I believe is true. And so, yeah, my goals are to see where the full preterist community is going to go. Who's going to be the leading voice? I'm thinking that Gary DeMar is going to eventually be a full preterist, and if he ever becomes a full preterist, it sounds like it. I don't know what else to say. I mean, he's been getting a lot of criticism lately that he's pretty much a full preterist, but I would like to have debates with full preterists until the casket closes. Have conversations with full preterists until the casket closes, because this full preterist doctrine I just find very, very amusing. It's impacted my life. I know it's impacted yours. And I think that when people come to that full preterist paradigm, there's just something about it that I have a lot of fun talking with the full preterist. So that's pretty much it. That's in a nutshell where I'm at, and we'll see what the future holds. And like I said, I'm in it just for the fun of it. I love Bible theology, always had when I was a kid, and here I am now. So I'm just in it because for the passion of this.
Well, great. Well, we appreciate your passion, and I know that you always bring something to chew on, something that we can ponder. You've given us some great insights here before, and I hope you continue to do so. So, I want to
Thank you.
thank you, sir, for contributing. I know you have a busy schedule. Thanks for sharing some of your time with us, so we could
Thank you.
discuss these things. Hopefully, we have some more discussions soon.
Yes.
But I want to also thank everybody out there. Make sure you subscribe to Tristan's channel. It's 21st Century Mice. Great channels, just taking off. I think it's going to grow significantly larger than it is, and I think it's going to really turn into something. But we will be on the receiving end of any adverse criticisms, and hopefully we'll get a few pats on the back over this. So I
Yeah.
want to thank everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.